So over Saturday and Tuesday, last night, we spent a lot of time looking at Iowa, specifically through the microscope. We've talked about cancer, which is always a tough subject to discuss. We've talked about water quality, agriculture, wetlands, economics, politics, trust, and stewardship. And we really took, hopefully, a good enough deep dive on those that we realize they're just individual pieces in the puzzle. Today, we're going to do something different. I want us to take a step. Pat, do you have something to add?
No, sorry about that.
No problem. I just didn't want to skip you if you had something there. Um, so, we're going to take a step back. Step back far enough to see the entire landscape. Because eventually, every conversation reaches a point where understanding the problem isn't enough. Eventually, we have to start answering a different question. What are we trying to build? So, we've spent 2 days discussing causes and history, consequences, trade offs, responsibilities. We've heard from the producer side, the environmental advocate side, scientists, governments. We've seen the areas of disagreement, but we also saw where there's some similarities there. There's some common ground that can be had. Everybody wants healthy communities. Everybody wants clean water, clean air, food security, healthy ecosystems. And everybody wants a future that is better than the present. So the disagreement is rarely about whether those things are desirable. The disagreement is in the journey of how we get there. So that's where we start day 3 here. Because every decision we make today is quietly shaping not only Iowa, but all of our states, all of our countries that future generations are going to inherit. Every decision, every investment, every choice. It's all shaping the future intentionally or not. And this brings an important realization to the table that the future is coming whether we are ready for it, whether we prepare for it or not. Technology is continuing to change, it seems like, at a more rapid pace than ever. Our weather patterns are obviously changing. Scientific understanding is deepening, hopefully. We know public policy is going to change. So that's not a question about change. The question is whether we shape that change or we simply react to it. And if you go back and study history, there's plenty of examples of countries and people and even states that shape the change. And there's plenty of examples of things that reacted to it. The ones that shaped that change, they anticipated, they adapted, and they innovated. And they ended up prospering. The ones that didn't, the ones that simply reacted, they ignored the warning signs. It's kind of like heading down the highway at 100 miles an hour and it says bridge out. It probably means you need to slow down and stop. But a lot of people or countries ignored those. They kicked the can down the road on difficult decisions. And then they found themselves face to face having to react to a crisis that either could have been minimized or avoided. And that difference comes down to one thing. And that's having a leader that has vision, the ability to look beyond the immediate challenge and ask one complex, difficult question: what kind of future are we creating? Because stewardship isn't about the next election. It isn't about somebody with an R or a D behind their name. It's not even about the next growing season or the next market report or maybe even the next decade. The harsh reality is stewardship is measured dramatically differently. It's measured in generations. The people who built our farms and our ranches and our communities, they often planted seeds whose benefits they never personally got to enjoy, experience, or maybe even see. And like it or not, that responsibility is now ours. So let's explore a different set of questions. What should Iowa or your state or your country look like 50 years from now? What should change? What has to change? What lessons from the past are still valuable? And what opportunities are emerging? Then, how do we create a future that's productive, profitable, healthy, and resilient? And the tough question out of that bunch is capable of meeting the challenges that we can't even see or understand yet. So, today's not going to be about blame or pointing fingers or pointing out villains. We're going to talk about possibility because the future hasn't been written yet. So, it still remains negotiable. So, let's start tonight with what I think is a pretty good question on top of the ones I already asked. When future generations inherit our states, our communities, our countries, what kind of place do we want them to inherit? Anybody want to dive into that? Anybody have an answer?
Well, I mean, I think there's a lot of broad ways we can go as far as healthy, safe, and but one of the things I feel is almost a starting point when you talk about like a strong leader. I think it implies sometimes that they're impulsive. It's just like, well, my gut tells me I do this and this. I really think you need to strongly believe in and support and encourage science. And I think that you start with somebody looking into the future that has the humility that is able to know that there's they know what they don't know, and I want leaders like that that are getting the best minds, the best science, the best of everything, and then guide a direction that is fed by, again, not letting your ego get ahead of you as to, my God, we don't need no goddamn vaccine here or there or something, that kind of reaction, or the reaction to like climate change and environmental rules, but are really able to know that they need to respect the science and the research and listen to it and get lots of ideas and make and help paint a vision to help people move forward. But it starts with that. And it starts with not taking yourself too seriously. Well, you take the job seriously, but don't believe that you automatically have all the answers and that you can really support, science as a key partner and making inputs of as you paint the future. It's my idea.
Excellent. Appreciate that, Roger. Anybody else?
Yeah, that was really great, Roger. I listened to the last 2 days, by the way, the last two Iowa shows. I think also it's education of our children. And I don't mean in only book smarts, but I also mean having them learn about the earth and learn about the seasons and learn about the weather, learn about the planet, learn about the ebb and flow of life. I mean, I also mean book smarts, and so that they can learn to respect scientific research, but and understand how to be a healthy person and how to support health of others, but also just understanding the way nature is. And I think it, kids that are stuck on their phones and stuck in the house every day don't get that opportunity to develop those more multidimensional relationships with the world. Um, so I would say that that's another really important element, because then they grow up and become, engaged in creating the world and become voters and become um, involved in perpetuating you know, whatever they're exposed to. And if they're not exposed to things, then they don't understand them. That's it. Thanks.
Good point, Stephanie, and I appreciate you listening to the replays. Hope they were good.
Excellent. Yeah, really excellent. Yeah. Thank you for doing those.
Good, good, good. Anybody else chime in?
Yeah, I think
Oh,
kind of those two things converging is also I'd like to for the because the question was what would you like the future to look like for um, who comes next, right? So that was the
what was that, Samuel? Sorry.
the question was what do we want the future to look like for the generations that come next? Is that what the
Yes. What do
right?
we want them to receive?
Yeah.
Inherit.
So putting those two things together for me at least it's I would like for us to make things again and make them really well for ourselves, for other parts of the world. I would like for the um, the pride in America to be the things that we as Americans do and make, and the knowledge of how to make those things, and the respect for the land, and the science that emerges when art and science have to come together. I think is often a lot more. Um, uh, Innovative than people realize, at least historically speaking. And so I think that would be really nice. I'd love to see that.
Awesome. Thank you, Samuel.
Shannon,
Yes, ma'am.
I would like to see the whole world, not just where I am, but the whole world, growing food like Mark does, right? And I say it like that because I've said this before. We have the haves and the have-nots, right? Those with resources can get the quality food. Those that don't have those resources get this other. And I and I And I just feel like if we could get to a place in number one, by doing so, we would protect the planet. I'm not saying 100%, but it would really help our planet. It would also slowly, if we slowly worked our way towards that, it would also give time for the soil to be healed, and then for that soil then to produce a non-chemical driven crop to feed the people. I mean, there's so much more than that, but that's just what comes to mind at this moment is for everybody to have access to the same quality of food to keep us going. And that's education. Stephanie mentioned that.
Thank you, Pat. So, one thing's certain about the future, though, it's not going to look exactly like the past. And for that statement, it can make people uncomfortable, especially for people who love the status quo. People love how their communities look, their traditions, their way of life. And this discomfort is understandable because a lot of the changes that were promoted as progress haven't necessarily delivered on their promises. Now, some changes we've seen have strengthened communities, strengthened agriculture, strengthened our countries. Some changes have weakened them. Some have increased opportunity, others have accelerated consolidation. Some have increased resilience, others have increased dependence. So when we say that Iowa's future and wherever you're from's future will look different, we should be clear about what we actually mean. Because the question isn't whether change is coming, the question is how it's going to be implemented. I mean, we've already seen technology change agriculture dramatically, especially in the last 20, 30 years. There's a lot of things that are no longer future concepts, but they are accepted as normal. And the people who successfully use information and technology are probably going to have advantages previous generations couldn't even fathom, couldn't even dream of. And we're going to see weather patterns change, continue to change. Whether you call that climate change or just changing weather, that's not the point here. But the key is, as ag producers and ranchers, when we continue to get this intense weather, it means more runoff, more erosion, more nutrient movement, more flooding pressure, more stress on drainage systems in communities, and greater challenges for all of us. So, regardless of how people interpret these changes, managing the water is going to become increasingly important. Consumer expectations will probably change because, well, there's going to be a new trend or a new fad or something like that come out. Global competition will probably change. I mean, just think about the last 20 years. Brazil has dramatically expanded their production to overtake the US. And there's a lot more questions being asked. How is our food produced? Where does it come from? What's the environmental impact? Transparency and sustainability. And these expectations sometimes evolve slowly or, in some cases, rapidly, but they're still moving. And if we start to understand these shifts early, we position ourselves so that we're not reacting, but we're preparing. And we know scientific understanding is going to continue to expand. Probably none of us 20 years ago had even considered forever chemicals being the terrible villain in every story. We probably didn't really think about soil health as producers. And we really probably didn't consider overall in general the ecosystem function. Because the overall goal was keep producing and keep producing more. So the honest position isn't blind acceptance of the technology or the research or policies that come out, nor is it automatic rejection. If we're truly honest with ourselves, it's to follow the evidence wherever it leads. And it really does come upon every one of us that's involved in agriculture, which, by the way, whether you're growing food or not, you're all involved in agriculture because we all eat. Oops. So we have a direct impact, if we'll take it, to demand that public policy be driven by true science, proven science. And then the ongoing debates about how society balances food production environmental protection, economic opportunity, and public health. So the question isn't whether change is coming for all of us, it is coming. It's whether we shape it deliberately or we react. And I know I've repeated that, and I want to keep repeating it because it's true. We have to figure out where we need to invest before the crisis occurs. To come to the table with all of our different ideas and start cooperating with agreements. Because, as mentioned, stewardship takes generations. It's not this election in November, it's not the presidential election in 2 years. That has nothing to do with stewardship. Because the next generation is not going to ask whether we preserved every old practice that we implemented. Did we leave the water cleaner? Are our communities more resilient? Did we leave agriculture more competitive? Did we prepare the system to be more capable of meeting future challenges? And did we solve problems when we had the opportunity, or did we just continue to kick it down the road, can down the road for somebody else to deal with? Folks, these are all generational questions, but they're the questions that matter most. The future isn't written yet, and it does remain somewhat negotiable. And the thing we need to realize is that nobody controls that future, and nobody individually or no single group is going to solve every challenge. And while a group can be blamed for every problem, that isn't a solution either. Because the future is shaped by everybody working together, disagreeing, competing, and ultimately sharing responsibility for what comes next. So, what should the future look like 50 years from now? What decisions that we're making today are going to determine whether we get there in a better shape or we just continue to kick that can down the road and now we're going to have to pay for it even more? And what responsibilities do we owe the generations that set the stage for us for trying to make things better today? I asked that question looking into the future in the last section. This one is, what responsibilities do we owe the past generations that built a foundation for us, good or bad? Any thoughts, any comments?
You know, when you talk about moving and getting those changes, what I think about is that you have to be prepared to get uncomfortable. You have to, there has to be, the whole group just doesn't move somewhere and there just all of a sudden is some law. You know, I think Pat was saying she wants to see more farmers like Mark, but I can show you places in the country, and you can too, that if a farm switched over to be Mark's farm, everybody'd start saying he was crazy, turned hippie, and and you know, we've heard it, haven't we, Shannon?
Mm,
And it takes that. I mean, these things don't happen unless you or and somebody else is going to say, I'm going to be willing to get, you know, all sorts of pressure down on me, and I'm going to step out of the accepted orthodoxy because it feels right, and I'm going to step up, and people will think I'm nuts, but eventually that works. So when you get that shift taking place, it's going to be individuals, and some of us in this room, hopefully, that really will stand up and take the heat. And even though you know you're going to be criticized for it, but feel like this is something we got to move this direction. And I think that's overlooked sometimes, is that you have to commit yourself to becoming, you know, uncomfortable. It's not easy, but when you but you can at least pose the questions and keep pushing until you get others to kind of jump in with it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Roger. Anybody else? Alrighty, I think I got all 10 questions in the chat. I tried to do some of them individually there, so hopefully they're all there. So we've examined Iowa as it exists today. We've looked at the past. And I've introduced in past rooms a game I call the what if game. That's how it was introduced to me. So we're going to try something different tonight, a thought experiment. Imagine we could start over, not erase Iowa, even though some people in South Dakota would like to. We're not going to erase the history. We're not going to erase the people who built it. Imagine, though, we could redesign the landscape knowing everything that we know today, the successes, the failures, the science, the economics, technological advances. And imagine we can put six groups at the drafting table: the producers, consumers, environmentalists, government, corporations, and scientists. Now, each group gets to go off in their own little corner first to design Iowa according to their own priorities. What do we think would happen? What would each of these groups build? What would they keep or change? And what would they overlook? Let's start it with the producers, just because, corn and beans and all that good stuff. Now, most people already probably assume that they know what the producers would come up with, especially in Iowa. We're going to have wall to wall corn. We're going to have livestock of all kinds. We're going to farm as much ground as we humanly possibly can. But I truly believe that producers would probably create something a lot more sophisticated, knowing what they know now. Because a lot of producers understand that something a lot of other people don't realize. That field isn't simply a field. It's a business, a weather system, a biologic system, a family legacy. I truly believe that the majority of producers, not all by any means, I think their first question would probably be, how do we create a landscape capable of producing food reliably? Not for one season, not for a decade, for generations. Now, producers would probably prioritize productive soils, reliable drainage, research, technology, infrastructure. And I don't think that, despite the common stereotypes associated with farmers and ranchers, that producers would I think they would likely support reduced erosion, improved water infiltration, targeted conservation, and better nutrient retention. Now, not necessarily because they're environmentalists would they also probably look for practical stewardship, but I think they would probably look at it from the lens of all that lost soil is expensive. You can't replace that overnight. Those lost nutrients are expensive when they don't go into growing a crop. Poor water management is expensive. So I truly believe that the producer's part would be highly productive, highly practical, and highly managed. But the greatest strength would be realism. Now, for the producers, I think this is where they would probably drop the ball, is trying to balance production with the broader ecological goals. Okay, I'm going to take each of these six separately. So, any thoughts really quick on this section? Once we get done with all six, I'll open it up for more in depth. That's kind of how I want to play this tonight. Alrighty, let's look at consumers because, well, that's what we all are. But consumers think differently. And like we've said, 98.4% of them aren't involved in agriculture. Are more focused on outcomes rather than methods. Consumers want, what do they want? Affordable food, safe food, convenient food, clean water and air, economic opportunity, and a higher quality of life. So this creates what some people call the consumer contradiction. On one hand, they want the lower food prices, but they also want higher environmental standards. They want more local production and greater transparency, but they want more wildlife habitat. They want better water quality, but they also want lower taxes and higher wages. And we're supposed to accomplish all of this somehow. Now, the challenge isn't that consumers are wrong. The challenge that they're going to drop the ball on is that reality contains trade offs. Every benefit that we talk about has cost. Every priority competes with another one. So while we all want cleaner water and air, we all want public health and local food opportunities. We all want stronger connections between food and health. It's just trying to balance all of these competing expectations with reality. Any thoughts, any comments, really quick on the consumer section? All righty, let's bring up the
If
environment. Oh,
if
go
I
ahead.
have signal, I'll just say real quick. I think a lot of consumers are so far removed from reality that they don't know what to expect anymore, and that's a bad case of how the system has worked to allow them to be that way.
It's a fair assessment. So the environmentalists, they,
Shannon, can you
oh,
hear me?
yes, Mark, go ahead.
Yeah. In that segment about consumers, you mentioned the competition between, you know, good, cheap food and environmental problems, and that they competed with each other. I find running my farm that it doesn't. It's quite harmonious. Everything works well. It's good for the environment. It's good for the people. Our prices, like my prices, sometimes I go into the supermarket and I have to put them up because I'm cheaper than the supermarket's conventional product. So, but that's in my own space. So I'll stand to be corrected in other spaces. But in my mind and in my experience, I don't feel that they are competing if it all works well. And I think and especially if you look at it long term and not on a short term basis. I'll keep the soundbite short.
I appreciate that. Don't worry, after we get done with the six, we'll expand and let everybody kind of get all of their thoughts out. So the environmentalists, they typically start with a different question. It isn't how much can the landscape produce, it's how well can that landscape function. And those are two very different things. More than likely, water and air would probably be their organizing principle, if I had to guess. Because water, well, it connects everything: agriculture, wildlife, cities, rural communities, human health, and ecosystems. Now, more than likely, the environmentalists are going to prioritize at their own little table the wetlands, habitat corridors, floodplain restoration, biodiversity, watershed planning, nutrient retention, ecological resilience. That's just a few that I came up with. And that none of those are wrong at all. But the environmentalists, through their lens, view wetlands as infrastructure, not scenery, but infrastructure. Now, to be fair, the environmentalists in their version of Iowa, it would probably be a lot cleaner, probably a lot more diverse, more resilient, and much more biologically complex. So we would gain long term ecological function, no doubt about it. The challenge that the environmentalist would face with their reality, with their lens, is balancing the goals with food production and economic realities. Any thoughts? Any quick? All righty, we get to the real. Oh, go
I'll
ahead, Brent.
just say the prioritization of things is different between whether it's a producer, a farmer, a consumer, or an environmentalist. They have different scales of priority they put on all those. So maybe they're over prioritizing, in my opinion, certain things that should be less prioritized as like the top thing we got to pay attention to. So I think it's a prioritization thing. Not that we aren't paying attention to it and it isn't something to watch, but it's like, should this be a 10 or should this be a 1 is where the disagreement comes.
I would agree. Now the lightning rod stakeholder, the government, and I had really a tough time being even keeled about this one. So we'll see how this comes out. But government rarely optimizes for one thing. They want stability, food security, economic stability, public health, risk reduction. And government should be thinking in systems. More than likely, they are at their little table, are going to emphasize monitoring and planning and hopefully infrastructure, public health, risk management. And their greatest strength is going to be coordination. Their challenge, and it's a challenge government's always faced, is balancing the competing interests without satisfying everybody. I kept that short because I had a real struggle with it. I'm sure everybody would add quite a little more to that section, but that's as good as I could do on that. Corporations, they typically start with a completely different question. How can value be created efficiently? They're more worried about the scalability, the predictability, and the return on investment. More than likely, if you let the corporations design Iowa or wherever you're from, they're probably going to emphasize technology, research, investment, supply chain efficiency, and scalable solutions. Now, the corporate side, it would be very highly productive and efficient and innovative. But their challenge at their little table would be the concentration of power and loss of local control. And we get to the last stakeholder. Oh, any thoughts on that? The last two? I'll just open it up for that.
So was one of them government, right?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I would just say the thing I like about government, I mean, it's a good thing and a bad thing, but the thing I I appreciate about government is that you can institutionalize good change. You can also institutionalize bad change. But if you do get policy or laws passed, and I'm talking more about a state and local level, um, it can become normalized and become hard to undo it. So, which is kind of what people have been saying in the other rooms about, using regulation and enforce. I think Jeremy talked a lot about property rights and using regulation and those kind of things as a way of enforcing those as a way of solving some of these problems that we're talking about.
I would agree. Anybody else?
You know, I almost think we can't talk about government in a way. It's like there's two different entities. There's elected officials, and then there's bureaucracy. And the bureaucrats have a certain job to do, and they can sometimes go overboard. But they are almost different worlds. It used to be that they were kind of in step with each other, but more and more, it's just being the elected official, getting elected, and all the politics get you on one stream, and the bureaucracy is left kind of unattended. And what that tendency is of regulating more and focus and so forth at the local, state, and national level, it just is more separated, I think, from elected. So to me, it's like there's two kinds of government, two stages of government, and they're a little different.
What are you talking about, Roger? Shannon talks about the government all the time. Only he just talks about how incompetent they are all the time.
You notice I
Mhm.
didn't put as much effort into that section.
Life that I can count on is Shannon's hatred for the government.
Alrighty, let's go to the scientists. More than likely, the scientists at their little table are going to start with a very different question. One that everybody else probably should be looking at. And that is, how does the system actually work? The cause and effect, theory versus reality, measurement, testing, understanding. Now, I perceive that the scientists, if they got to design Iowa in their image, would include a lot of adaptive management, watershed management, soil health research, water retention, public health tracking. And I think they would probably really emphasize continuous learning. I'm hopeful that scientists would ask the questions of why force a landscape to do something that it naturally resists? And why not align the land use with landscape function? I believe that the scientist would try to build Iowa in the form of, or in the manner of being highly informed, highly adaptive, and highly measured. Their greatest strength would be understanding. I think that their challenge would be deciding which values that society should prioritize. Because science can inform decisions, but they alone cannot make them. Alrighty, I've given you the six. Now I will open it up. Anybody have any overall thoughts there?
Well, the what you said about the if you leave things up to corporations, it made me think of company towns. I've always been fascinated by company towns. You know, you say they'd be like maybe ultra efficient. You know, but of course, so we have a historic precedent for them, so we can study them, and of course they still exist, and depends on what country you're talking about. But it just made me think about that. The railroad barons and the minings and the lumber industries. I'm on the West Coast, so it made me think of that. Then of course, Westworld. The famous Westworld and the remake, which is highly popular. But just some humor there, I guess.
I haven't seen the remake. So, alrighty. Anybody else?
Yeah, I was going to say, thank you for the kind words, by the way. I enjoy being crazy. Uh, no, but I feel like it's sort of built in that this is all really hard to change, and I really feel like it's just maybe taking on a bit of crazy and farmers trying, something different in one of their back paddocks, and just getting started. It's not that hard. It's not that big. It's really just a matter of learning, through experimentation and trying things out. And I've luckily got to thank you mentioned there that it's generations that'll take the change or make the change, and it'll be grassroots. And I've luckily got to thank, my father before me and a couple other people around me for making this change. Or I don't know whether I would have done it or not because they were a lot crazy. I can afford to be a little bit crazy. I sort of thank them for taking on the brunt of it.
Good points, Mark. Anybody else want to open up on any one of these six or overall? Because we're going to tie them together here in a second, but I wanted to give everybody else a chance to tie it together in their own words.
May I share?
Yeah, go ahead, young lady.
So, around the table, there are producers, consumers, environmentalists, government, scientists. Probably they will kill each other with no solution. You know, I'm a pessimist.
Yeah, a little bit of a
They know
pessimist
the
there, but
answer. All of them know the answer. But who is gonna make the first step? It's really hard, Cheshire. Really hard. And the future, I don't think the future is far away from us. The future is now. Right now, it's happening now.
So I just like to push back on that just a little bit. Speak out for science. Science isn't the truth. It's the search for truth. Science is just a method of investigation. Nothing more, nothing less. It's not a way of life. It's not a belief system. It's just a method of investigation. The scientific method. It's not the truth. It's the search for truth. And it's and it's always incomplete. So uh, don't think that science has all the answers. It's just the search for the answers.
thank you,
Yeah,
Frank.
I want to respond, Frank. Frank, that's a very good message, I think. And truth doesn't have to be found in a laboratory. And goes to my earlier point, it can be found on your own farm. I treat this whole thing as an experiment, and, and I've done a lot of things wrong, and continue to do so. But I just keep going with the things that work and drop the things that don't work. And I feel like it's that simple. I actually feel like we should look at just the now and not look at the future. If we all just did our best now to move towards a better future, then it's quite easy, really. It's just getting started today.
Good points. Anybody else?
Oh, yes, I was respond to Vogue. I feel like we sort of silo our people uh, in environmentalists, politicians, consumers, but we're really all people when it comes down to it. We're all eat food and we're all involved in this together. And if we could talk with one another respectfully, as happens a lot in this room, that's one thing that Shannon's achieved here is a room where we can all talk, and we're all from all different backgrounds. And if there was more rooms like this in other buildings, on other platforms, I'm sure that we could find some common ground and move forward.
Well, that's because for the longest time, academia and any profession was we used reductionism, right? So everybody became a specialist, and the in order for the reductionism only works if the specialists are still communicating to in order to understand the whole. Like they have to be sharing the knowledge in order to better understand the whole. Like this microbiologist who understands a cell better than anything in the world. You ask a physicist, a microbiologist, and a geologist the same question, and you'll get three different answers. And they all, they'll argue like, "You're retarded. No, you're retarded. You're retarded." And they like because we've let it get to a point where there's a pathological breakdown between in academia with reductionism, and that because the specialties aren't the specialists aren't communicating anymore. Like they're not coming to the table, and like you're maybe starting to see a bit of a shift in that now, like especially with AI democratizing intelligence and the internet. The sum total of the knowledge of humanity on a device in my pocket. That I can also watch people get kicked in the nuts all day on YouTube with.
Watch
So
your language.
that wasn't a swear.
No, but
That was the
uh,
food item.
uh,
but,
Um,
but yeah, no, you know, like it's so with you're starting to see a push for to be get back to generalists. You know, the jack of all trades is like the people who will dominate the next era of our economic experiment are going to be the polymaths, and you know you're going to see farmers are positioned the best because there's no better jack of all trades than a farmer. There's no better problem solver than a farmer. You know.
all right,
all
Brian.
right, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Frank. I lost signal evidently driving up in and out of the shop. But the biggest thing is like science is great. It gives us a starting point, gives us some more understanding. But the problem is when we do top-down studies, sometimes they don't capture the whole system. And those of you who've been in here for a while know I'm big about a systems approach because if you want to take one little thing in isolation and say, hey, this is what I found, this is true everywhere, always, all the time, that's not always the case. Like it gives us a good like springboard to jump off of and get started from, but it's not the absolute truth all the time everywhere. So yeah, science is great. I mean, I come from an engineering background where I thought, hey, I can make it in agriculture. I just got to apply numbers and a spreadsheet. Well, life taught me that that's not always true because Mother Nature has her own curves to throw at us. And how we react and how we deal with those as agricultural professionals, aka farmers, ranchers, and other people in the field that are here to support us, that's what truly makes, the systems approach work well. And is it perfect every time? No. But in general, if you look at the majority of the decisions made, they move us towards the betterment of all. And so, like, did we implement something that wasn't the best practice? Yeah, maybe we did, but guess what? We found out it wasn't. We modified the way we approached it and we made it better, one step at a time. So I'll add that in that, like, a lot of the stuff that has been done or that is currently being done wasn't done because, hey, we don't care about anybody. It's like, hey, this is the best information we have. This is the best outcomes we've gotten. Let's keep following this path. And then if you have to adjust and translate that for your given area, your given sector of agriculture, that is what's really important is that farmers and ranchers have been doing that for decades and they're hoping to get past the third generation, which usually the first generation builds it, second generation expands it, and third generation loses it because they weren't there for the building or the expansion stage. And if you really want to look, I think we got a lot of great producers out there that are in the fourth and fifth generations of agriculture, even if like they've moved to a new farm or done something different than their parents were doing, because guess what? We can't all stay at the same farm because the farm can't support 10 families or, whatever number. So with that, I think, sorry, Shannon, I wasn't here for all of this because, agriculture happens and it's been busy here. But that is, I think, the great telling of this story is agriculture has tried to make the best of everything in the long run and try to take all the best things and continue on with those. And yeah, are we perfect all the time? No. But are we striving for perfection? Yes. And I think that's what's important. So thanks, Shannon, for putting this together. I think this is your last room of these, but I apologize for
Yep.
missing some of them.
Yep. This is part three. We'll finish her up tonight.
Agree with you, Brian. Uh, you were pushing back at all. By the way, I was just
So,
bugging.
Yep, Pat.
hosting the ingredient profile forum, right? And you, Shannon, hosting this room too. I would also give, Stephanie her flowers too, and hosting Mother Earth and all that. So with this question, Shannon, you rolled out a lot of questions, but uh, I'm still trying to figure out how to bring people to their food. And people go out and gather, right? Grocery stores, what have you, farmers market, what have you. but to really bring them to the table of conversation is like the hardest thing to do. And I say that in that I talk to a lot of people out in the community, events, even in the grocery store. And in those conversations, when I mention this group and how long I've been in this group and what this group has taught me that I try to bring to the community, the face that I get, the odd look that I get of misunderstanding or disconnect is a better word, that you sit around and talk about where the food comes from, that kind of look. And that's what's concerning to me. And I think it's probably Brian who has said, maybe people need to go hungry. And that is not my mindset. But sometimes I stop and pause and think, maybe you do need to go hungry to get it, how important this is, and come to the table, talk about it, and support it. Just a thought.
Yep, I think it was the other South Dakotan, Kyle, Pat, that
K
mostly said
K
that.
Y K Y.
Yes, KY.
No,
Yes,
no, but
South
Brian
Dakota Kyle.
has said it before too, right, Brian?
I agree with this statement
Yeah,
wholeheartedly,
yeah.
so we're on the same page.
I guess the conversation at the time was about SNAP, to be honest with you, when the statement was made. And so at the end of the day, yes, to get people to care and have pause and concern, maybe they do need to go hungry. I don't know, but this is a very important conversation. All of the conversations we have here are very important. Thank you.
Can I just drag that out a little bit?
Yep.
Like when I think go hungry and other people think go hungry, it's not like we want people starving and malnourished, but we want them hungry enough to where they're like, oh, hey, this is something important. I need to pay attention to it because it's not just readily available. So, and I think that's the sentiment that everybody who's a mod and usually joins this room agrees with.
So
Oh no, I want them to go hungry, Brian.
Boy, Pat's on a roll tonight. She
I'm
is
like,
just,
hey, y'all need to feel some hunger pains, I
go
guess.
Californian.
man.
I was watching this. I'm in treatment right now for addiction issues and whatnot. But so they put on this documentary today called, I think it was called "The Biggest Little Farm," and it was like it was overblown and over dramatized. But it's these Californian guys the couple that buys this farm, and Mark, you would like it because they do a biodynamic, but they realize how hard it is, and it's I don't know, it might be something up your alley. It was funny to me.
Yeah,
Roger.
I have seen that
Yeah,
movie. I have seen that movie, and Frank. So, whilst they're biodynamic, they're not like I do it. But anyway, I had some criticisms about the whole show. I agree, it was a bit over dramatized, but anyway, it did depict the challenges that farmers have on an everyday basis.
Yep, Roger.
I think it starts with better clarification and acceptance of defining the issue. And for example, start with the premise like, why does Iowa have such high cancer rates, for example? And the question, as you've gone through this and what the practices are, made me start thinking it depends. If you're talking rural Iowa, it's different than Des Moines because the health issues, because of the water systems and other things, you're probably a lot better off drinking the water in Des Moines than some of the smaller communities that don't have a very sophisticated water system, and certainly people on farms that are just out of their own wells. And in fact, you might find from a health standpoint, there's a whole lot of difference between the health of people in downtown Des Moines and downtown Chicago or downtown Denver, although Denver's got air quality issues. But the rural areas, and this is where it might have flipped in the last 50 years. It started, we thought that to be healthy, you wanted to get out of the city because of carbon monoxide and live in the country. But with all of what you're talking about, the Raccoon River, and the other issues, let alone applications and so forth, that might not be the case anymore. it might mean that you have to be able to look at these areas and say where we thought it was used to be healthy, the health issues might be really around farmers and people that live around farmers even more so. And the cities might be pretty buffered. Well, defining that and finding out for sure what the facts are, as it seems to me, is an important place to start on all these issues.
Absolutely. So I'm going to make a statement here that probably is going to step on some toes, but I think we can all come to an agreement. And that is that the most difficult thing to change is the 6 inches between our ears. And this is where, when we compare all six versions of Iowa for each stakeholder, the differences are pretty obvious, I think. But the overlap is there. The common ground is apparent. We all want healthy soils and healthy communities. Even the environmentalists want agriculture to succeed. Maybe for different terms, but they want it to succeed. They don't like to go hungry either. Corporations want predictable systems. Governments want stability. Scientists want better understanding. So the overlap is a lot larger than some people on social media or regular media would like us to believe. Which leads us to a very difficult realization in my mind. Perhaps Iowa's greatest challenge is not nitrate or cancer or wetlands or regulation or economics. The greatest challenge is trust. We talked about this yesterday. When trust disappears, every study becomes suspect. Every policy becomes political. Every solution becomes controversial. So the future is not going to be built by one stakeholder defeating another or defeating all the others. It's built on that common ground. Now, not perfect agreement. Not everybody singing kumbaya and holding hands and sitting around saying, okay, we're 100% in agreement. That's never going to happen. It's finding common ground. Because if one group wins completely, everybody else loses. And eventually the system loses too. Now, throughout the previous two rooms, we've been focused on Iowa, the farms, the water, the cancer concerns, the wetlands, the politics, and the future. But out tonight, like I said, we wanted to step back. We wanted to take a broader view here. Let's ask a larger question. Why should anybody outside of Iowa care about what's happening in this usually flyover state where 80 to 85% of our land goes to create food? I mean, why should somebody in New York City care? Why should somebody in LA care? Well, I think the answer is pretty straightforward. In a lot of ways, Iowa's not unique. In some ways it is, but I think it's one of the clearest examples of a set of pressures that are reshaping agricultural landscapes across the US and whatever country you're from. Now, what Iowa is working through, a lot of tension between productivity and water quality, economic viability and environmental stewardship, between short term incentives and long term resilience. And none of those are unique to Iowa, by the way. They're all modern problems. Iowa just happens to have them in unusually concentrated and visible form. You go to Illinois or Indiana or Minnesota or Missouri, all of those states share Iowa's core challenges in ways that are way beyond coincidence. Not that I believe in coincidence. They mostly share the same geology, the same tile drainage infrastructure, the same row crop systems, the same relationship to the Mississippi River Basin, and the same downstream consequences in the Gulf of Mexico with the hypoxia zone. That dead zone in the Gulf, it's fed by the nutrients that left farm fields across the entire Midwest watershed. Maybe it went directly into the Mississippi. Maybe it went down the Ohio. Maybe it came through the Raccoon River. But it all ended up in the Mississippi and down in the Gulf. And that is carrying the accumulated legacy of management decisions made thousands of miles upstream. The dead zone, according to scientists, in recent years has averaged more than 4,000 square miles. The target set by federal and state agencies is under 2,000. They've been tracking this for almost 4 decades. Cut it in half. That's not Iowa's failure alone. It belongs to every state that contributes to that watershed. And solving it's going to require every state in the watershed to do whatever they can, not voluntarily, not what is politically convenient, but it's got to be together and with sufficient enough ambition to actually move the needle. Now, the Midwest is not unique in that way. We talked about the Chesapeake Bay watershed, where they have the same tension between ag intensity, urban environments, and water quality and industry. It's a different landscape, different crops, different politics. It's still the same fundamental questions. Travel to California's Central Valley, groundwater depletion, salinity, limits of irrigation dependent agriculture. And they're face to face now with a less reliable water supply because the Colorado, as we know, is in real trouble. Go to the high plains, and we've talked about the Ogallala Aquifer that starts in Nebraska and ends up in the panhandle of Texas. Scientists are telling us that it's being drawn down faster than it's recharging. This is a slow motion crisis that eventually those farmers and ranchers and communities are coming to face with a reckoning of how much the Great Plains can sustain irrigated agriculture. And the US is not unique. You go to the Netherlands, they've spent decades dealing with nitrogen deposition so severe that it actually triggered a court ordered reduction in livestock density. And we've talked about the confrontation between agriculture and environmental law in the Netherlands. And it's happening across Europe, France, Germany, Denmark. The same questions about nutrient management, water quality, and the limits of intensive agriculture are producing political conflicts that are very similar to what's happening here in Iowa. Different cultures, different languages, different institutional contexts, but the same questions. Brazil's Cerrado, Argentina's Pampas, the rice growing regions of Asia, the emerging ag frontiers of sub Saharan Africa. Everywhere that modern intensive ag is expanding, it brings productivity that feeds, 8 billion people. But it keeps creating the same set of questions that people don't want to answer. What happens to the water, the soil, the biologic communities, and the human health of the people and animals who live in and downstream of those landscapes? The details are different. The climates are different. The crops are different. The cultures are different. The questions aren't. How do we feed people? How do we protect our water? How do we remain economically competitive while managing environmental consequences? And how do we preserve enough biologic diversity to maintain the resilience of the systems that we need and depend on? For a lot of the 20th century, the dominant question in ag was, how do we produce more? How does Kyle in South Dakota produce more food than his animals can consume and can be put into the markets? And agriculture answered the call and the question with extraordinary success. The 21st century, though, is making us face to face with a much, much harder question. And it's reaping the consequences of our production of the 20th century. And that question is, how do we produce enough while maintaining the resilience of the systems that made all of this production possible? Folks, that question doesn't have a clean, simple, nice, pat answer because it requires holding productivity and stewardship together rather than trading one for the other. It requires time horizons beyond this planting season and the next harvest or the next election. It requires the kind of systems approach thinking that all of these conversations that we have in this room are about. Now, Iowa's greatest contribution to the global challenge isn't going to be how much corn or soybeans we raise, how much pork or poultry or beef we raise, or even how much ethanol we produce. Iowa's greatest contribution may be helping the world learn how to navigate the trade offs between production and protection, economics and ecology, individual rights and public interest, today's needs and tomorrow's future. Folks, I don't care where you are from, what country, what state. The harsh reality is that every agricultural society on earth is going to have to face these questions, either now or in the future. That's why these three conversations have mattered way beyond Iowa's borders. And this is why what Iowa chooses to do or not do over the next 5, 10, 20 years is probably going to be watched very closely and learned from, hopefully, far beyond the Midwest. Any thoughts? Any comments?
Well, I just got here, so, but what would you say is like the
I can
thing?
hardly hear you, Jason.
Oh, sorry. I've got probably water in my mic. Um, what would what is the thing that Iowa can get right that the others can learn from? It's not going to be, desalinization or something like that, or nuclear power, but is it a technical thing? Is it a policy?
I think I heard your question, but you were so kind of muted that I couldn't hardly hear everything there. So, what we've been discussing the last 3 nights, and we're going to close with this, hopefully, tie everything together well. And by the way, if you're missed the first part of this, I did put the 10 questions in the chat that I would like everybody to consider as we finish this room up tonight. Um, and hopefully that sparks some conversations between all of us. So what prompted this room is that Iowa has climbed to number 2 in the cancer race, if you will, right behind Kentucky, which is a whole different environment than Iowa. So it's tied to Iowa because 80 to 85% of our acres here in the state go to agriculture in some way or fashion. And we have the unique, I guess, part that radon is naturally occurring here, which adds to cancer, unfortunately. But also, you add in the pesticides and everything else. And so, as we've explored tonight and the last two nights, it really tries to tie this thing down and put a mirror on this. And so, before I go to the mirror part, any other thoughts or comments? Almost just went right through.
I have some. I don't know quite how to. One thing I got to say though is why is it that more and more rural areas and farms are having water delivered from the city? And you can go out and I've seen them, and the trucks are coming out and dropping the big bottles of water. It's because people that living out in rural areas, and it didn't used to be this way, have had their water tested, and it's not safe for them. And so they're actually shipping water out because the farm wells are so polluted, it's not good for their health. And somebody prove to me that's wrong, because they are out there and those trucks are delivering bottled water, and they wouldn't do it if they weren't afraid of getting sick and having issues with their water. And I think that's something that's a shift that's telling us something that should be looked into.
So, to Roger's point, when I had
I
my
have
own,
some of the answers
yes, go ahead, Kyle.
to Roger's questioning. So in some cases, it's because the wells in a lot of these farms were dug back in the 30s, 40s, some of them even prior to that, and the wells just frankly dried up. And to get a well crew out to dig that well deeper is a lot of money. That's some cases. Other cases, your number one and number two pollutants when it comes to well water, groundwater, is high nitrates and iron. Now, that iron has always been there in all these wells. We've got a well that is very high in iron. All of our water pipes are really pretty burgundy color coming off that well. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just it tastes like you're, well, taking a bite out of the tractor if you drink that water. Doesn't bother the cattle, doesn't hurt the crops, just is what it is. Um, when some of these big dairies came into South Dakota, they could not get permitted from the state of South Dakota to have their own well on site. They had to hook up to rural water. And that's a Department of Ag and Natural Resources regulation that, with their nutrient management plan, they cannot have a well on site. My well that my farm is on, when we tested the water, came back cleaner than the local city water. So it's not everywhere, and our practices aren't any different from most of the other farms out there. It's mostly where you are contributing to what's affecting your well. And when we had kids, we were told by the doctors, well, if you're on well water, then you can't give that to the kids. Okay, yeah, we're on well water, so we were supposed to switch our house over to rural water, and we have both connections, so that wasn't an issue. But when we sampled both, our well came back, I mean, with virtually no nitrates in it, and the nitrates from the public water source were right at the allowable maximum per government guidelines. So that's just a couple of the nuances of it, that not everywhere is this a thing.
That's great, Kyle. I'm really glad you explained that, and I think that makes perfect sense. But people need to know. In some areas, nitrates are an issue, and
Hmm.
possibly agriculture systems are contributing, but not everywhere. So it's not. Uh, but in some places it is, and I'm not surprised you're careful and test it and got it covered.
Yep.
Anybody else? Any thoughts? So, over the last three rooms we've been together, I've tried to ask you some very difficult questions, hopefully to spark some thought, to spark some conversation. Not politically difficult, not hopefully personally difficult. I mean, we've examined a lot: Iowa's history, Iowa's cancer position, farmers, consumers, corporations, government, environmental groups, lobbyists, money, activists. But I'd ask you to set that aside for a few minutes and look in the mirror. Because everything that we have discussed these 3 days has one thing in common, and that's people. Everyone has joined us over the last 5.5 years belongs to the system that we have talked about, not as an observer, but as an active participant. So if you're a producer or a rancher, what is one specific thing you could do differently? Not eventually, not next year or 5 years down the road, not when the economics get better or waiting for the neighbor to do it first. What is one thing? If you're a consumer, which all of us are, do your daily choices actually align with the future that you say you want? When you go to the grocery store, you reach for the cheapest option. When you skip that testing of your well, in Iowa, when you don't test your home for radon, or maybe when you vote against conservation funding because the taxes are going to go up a lot, are those choices consistent with what you say you value? If you're a scientist, can you communicate as effectively as you research? Is your work reaching the people who most need to act on it? Or does it just go to the people who already agree with you? If you're a policymaker, are your programs just theory or do they work in reality? Are they measuring outcomes or counting practices and calling it the same thing? If you're an environmental advocate, do you genuinely understand the economic pressures that producers face? Not abstractly, not on some spreadsheet, very specifically. The land payments, the taxes, the input cost, the margins, the weather risk, the debt. Do you fully understand the pressures so that you can design systems and solutions that actually work within that? If you're a corporate leader or corporate business, does your business model strengthen the long term system that your supply chain depends on? Or are you just extracting value from that system faster than it can replenish it? Now, think about somebody who isn't here tonight. Maybe it's a child or a grandchild. Maybe it's a future farmer or scientist. Maybe it's going to be somebody who inherits that farm ground that you drive by every day. Now, imagine if they stopped you at the coffee shop and asked you, you knew about all these water quality challenges. You knew about the cancer concerns. You knew about the wetlands and the prairie and the Gulf of Mexico dead zone. You knew about the nitrate in the wells. You knew all of this. So, what did you do? What is your answer? Now, no generation inherits perfection in any way, shape, or form. Every generation that has come inherited a very imperfect system, whether that was knowledge or relationships or water or soil or institutions. But what matters is not whether the system is perfect when we get it. What matters is it better after we had our hands on it? Not perfect, but better. And in my opinion, that's the most honest definition of stewardship ever written. Improvement. Not solving every little thing, not even maybe solving some of the biggest issues, but actually moving things in the right direction consistently over time. Even when it's inconvenient, even when you're going to upset some people, even when the economics are difficult or the politics are messy. Our future isn't going to be built by one single stakeholder. Folks, it's built by the millions of daily decisions that all of us make across years. Decisions made on farms and ranches, decisions made in that urban kitchen, decisions made in the voting booths or county courthouses, corporate boardrooms or university laboratories. Those decisions start now. Folks, the question is not what should they do. The question is what should I do? Any thoughts or comments before we hit the close here? Alrighty. Going once, going twice. Alrighty. So we've reached the end of our 3-day journey. And stupid thing jumps on me once in a while. So tonight we started with concern. Well, the 3 days have been about concern. And I think on the surface, a lot of them seem simple. Find the cause, get a solution, fix the problem, and then move on to the next thing. But I don't think that's what we uncovered. I think what we uncovered isn't one thing. It's not just agriculture. It's not simply water or economics or public health. It's all of those things. A living system built by generations, shaped by decisions, improved by innovation, and changed by necessity, with a continual rewriting by the people who call it home. We looked backwards to what Iowa was with the prairie, the landscape that once held water differently, supported life differently. Now, it was by no means a paradise, not a template to be copied, but it was a teacher. It was an education. It was a landscape whose lessons about water retention, nutrient cycling, soil building, and biologic resistance matter probably today more than ever. And as we look forward toward a future that's shaped by a lot of different pressures and expectations and decisions, and more importantly, the choices we make right now. So, along this journey of 3 days, we've heard from a lot of different avenues. And the 6 stakeholders that we focused on each carried a different vision with different opportunities and risks and responsibilities. But I want you to carry this away is that none of those 6 stakeholders had the full picture. Now, none of them were entirely wrong or wrong in the questions that they asked because they all saw the reality. from their lens. What we've done in this room over the years is remind people that food doesn't come from the grocery stores. It comes from the soil and risk and labor and weather and knowledge and people willing to gamble on planting and seeing how the season plays out. And the environmentalists remind us that landscapes perform functions way beyond production and that ecosystems have limits. And science tries to remind us that nature follows rules whether we want to acknowledge them or not. And understanding the system is a prerequisite for improving it. Consumers remind us that food systems ultimately exist to serve people. And consumers shape those systems whether they realize it or not. Now, whether we like the current government or the current bureaucrats is not relevant to this conversation. It reminds us, though, that there's a lot of competing interest across time and scale that they try to balance. And corporations remind us that innovation and investment matter. Folks, the next chapter is already being written. And now I think we arrive at the realization that matters. The landscapes that all of us see around the world aren't determined by any one individual or any one group. It's the ability to work together. And I know I've beat on that drum quite a few times over the last 3 days. And I'm probably going to beat on that drum some more in the future. Folks, we all don't have to work in perfect harmony. We don't have to be without conflict or hard disagreement. Folks, we all need to come together with enough shared commitment to our land, our water, our communities, and the future that the conversation keeps going. Because water doesn't care whoever is in your capital city. It doesn't care about what sports team is playing. It doesn't care whether somebody's farming conventionally or biodynamically. It doesn't care whether somebody is an urban resident or a rural resident. Water follows gravity. Nutrients follow chemistry. Biology follows biology, and reality follows reality. And I think water asked a question. Our landscapes ask a question. Are you going to work with me or against me? So, the greatest challenge facing all of our communities and our countries is not going to be some nutrient, whether that be nitrate or phosphorus or something else. It's not even going to be forever chemicals or heavy metals or microplastics or cancer. The greatest challenge may be learning how to hold two truths at the same time. Now, agriculture has been one of humanity's greatest success stories. But agriculture needs to come to the realization that that does not exempt them from improvement. Because the environmental concerns are legitimate, and we are going to have to deal with them at some point. But the solutions have to be economically realistic. Folks, science matters, people matter, productivity and stewardship matter. So while this conversation has covered a lot of territory, water and cancer started this whole 3 days. But we can wrap that up in one word, and it's called stewardship. What does it mean to inherit something valuable? And what responsibility comes with that inheritance? Folks, we all inherited land that we didn't create. We all inherited roads that we didn't build. We all inherited knowledge that we didn't discover. So I asked this question a little bit ago. Will we leave it better than we found it? Nobody solves this alone. We all have to sit at the same table despite our disagreements, despite our different views. Learn, truly listen before we speak. We have to learn before we start having conversations. We need to understand before demanding, and we need to improve before we condemn people. The prairie was very powerful, not because one species dominated, it's because thousands of species worked together with different strengths, different functions, and different roles. It was all connected. Maybe, perhaps, resilient human systems are built the same way. So as you look out your front door, maybe you look as you drive in some rural area. 50 years from now, somebody stands exactly where you are or driving where you are. They drink the water. Maybe they study the science or raise families in rural communities. And as they look back 50 years, I think they're going to ask, what did they truly know? What did they do and what did they leave behind? Folks, we have to be willing to ask difficult questions. We have to be willing to confront uncomfortable realities. I hope that when they look back that 50 years, that they realize that we were working on getting better at valuing productivity and stewardship, that we got better at choosing cooperation over division, and that we finally understood the system well enough to improve it. Folks, the future is not written by one single thing. The future is written acre by acre, decision by decision, conversation by conversation, neighbor by neighbor, and generation by generation. Folks, when each of us returns to our own corner of the system, our own little kingdom, I hope that we carry a little more understanding, a little more humility, and a little more willingness to work together. So I put that 10 questions in the chat. And like I said earlier, I hope that everybody takes those and at least starts the conversation or the thought process. Folks, they're not questions for the politicians or scientists or environmental advocates or somebody else. They're all questions for each of us. So I hope that we think deeply, listen carefully, ask better questions, and we truly leave the land and each other better than we found them. Any thoughts? Any comments? Anybody want to add anything? Wow. Okay. So I just left everybody stunned, I suppose. So on Saturday, we are going to do a leadership room. It's in the process, it's not quite completed yet. Um, but just to give since there is a lot of people here tonight, to give you a hint of what it's going to be about, it's going to be about why. Um, and I think it fits well with this presentation this journey we've been on the last 3 days. At least I hope so. So, alrighty. Anybody else? Thoughts? Comments?
Shannon, I think we're all speechless because you did such a good job. So
Thanks, Mark. I appreciate that.
No kidding. I was actually just sitting here thinking. Uh, I know I like to do ball busting on you, Shannon. It's a lot of fun. I enjoy it, but I really do appreciate that you do these.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Jefferson. Anybody else?
Yeah, I appreciate it as well. I'll just say that.
Great room, Sean. Right.
Thank you. Roger?
Yeah, I think the whole thing. I think you did a really good job, and they covered a lot of area. What's left that got my attention that I want to kind of go back and dig in more is just like nitrogen use.
Mm-hmm.
One of the actionable things that I take away from it that you were raising a really good point that there's a lot of controls, and actually Kyle mentioned this too about the dairies and the limitations and restrictions on livestock. But as you pointed out, if you want the 500 bushel corn crop, you can pour nitrogen on to your heart's content, which causes people like farmers like Kyle, when they want to start a family, to have them say, don't make the formula with your well water because the nitrate levels might lead to all kinds of issues with your children. And that story is out there and it never gets talked about. And it's the fact that you have to be careful, and these things are connected. And when you go back and say those 2 points, like you pointed out, there's no limitations on how much nitrogen and overusing the nitrogen and and all this getting through the soil and into the water tables and everything. I mean, it's a health hazard and it's causing problems. And you say you stand on that farm and you look back and say, gee, how about my ancestors? How were they 100 years ago? What's different? Well, one difference is they could give their kids the water from the well 100 years ago, and they got to pause now and go to the county seat and have it tested to see whether they happen to have an issue or they don't have an issue. It might be iron everywhere, like Kyle pointed out, but not nitrate levels. That wasn't 100 years ago, it wasn't 50 years ago. It's worse now than it was then, and there's health issues because of it, and that's something that could be addressed, I think, maybe.
Nope, I agree with you 1,000%, Roger.
They weren't testing for it back then. So, yeah, we know about it now.
Yeah, but the way we put our nitrogen on back then, Kyle, was off a manure spreader, and that's a little different too.
No, we've put liquid fertilizer on for 50 years.
Yeah, right after World War II, but not 100 years, to Roger's point.
Yeah. No, that's exactly right. But I think some of the problem goes back to we didn't know back then what we know now. Same thing with radon. We had no idea that these basements had radon in them, and in a lot of cases still don't, until we started sealing up the houses. Like my house, you can't light a match on a windy day and keep it lit. Like that's just the way these old farmhouses are. Um, but our well is right in the middle of all of our feedlot, and we were always told, well, well water has a nitrate problem. Well water's got a nitrate problem. Okay, Great. Ours is right in the middle of a feedlot, which by all intents and purposes should mean that our nitrates are high, but they're not. So where's the rest of these nitrates coming from? Where is the public water nitrates coming from? Well, they did a study on the Big Sioux River in eastern South Dakota several years ago, and Jay Gilbertson was the head of the East Dakota Water District, and they took water samples all the way along the Big Sioux River, tributaries going in, tile water going in, before and after cities, Watertown, Esteline, Brookings, all these cities. And what they found is that the cities, between their storm sewer water and all the runoff coming from cities, the nitrates get excessively high very quickly. Watertown's bad, Brookings is worse, Flandreau is far and beyond worse. And where they tested the water coming out of Sioux Falls, it's toxic. Well, everybody downstream of that is having to drink that. I don't know.
That's part of
Just where
the
my
answer.
mind goes. Mm-hmm.
Hey,
It
hey,
is
Kyle, why is it that they don't let the new dairies dig wells?
because they don't want new wells within so many feet of a lagoon.
which the
So
dairies are
if they,
required to have.
yeah, if they want to dig a well, they got to dig a well a half mile away from their own lagoon. The only way around that is if you had a well on your dairy and now you're expanding your dairy into a class C, B, or A CAFO. That's the only way that you can get around that.
Boy, I've learned something. Thanks.
That's why we show up. Anybody else? Alrighty, we will be back on the news tomorrow night and Friday. And then, like I said, we'll do the leadership. I'm not sure what next week looks like as far as rooms go. Um, we'll see if I survive tomorrow. I got to work calves tomorrow, so um, for day two, we'll see if I survive that one tomorrow. Um, but yeah, alrighty.
Okay, next time.
You're welcome.
Yeah, well done.
Thank you, Roger.
Sometimes late at night. Well done, Cheshire.
Thank you.
Congratulations, I awake and watch her excellent job. Sleeping.
Thanks, Shannon. Thank you. Thank you.
She's lost in peaceful dreams, so I turn out the lights and lay there in the dark. And the thought crosses my mind, if I never wake up in the morning, would she ever doubt the way I feel about her in my heart? If tomorrow never comes, will she know how much I loved her? Did I try in every way to show her every day that she's my only one? And if my time on earth were through, she must face this world without me. Is the love I gave her in the past gonna be enough to last if tomorrow never comes? 'Cause I've lost loved ones in my life who never knew how much I loved them. Now I live with the regret that my true feelings for them never were revealed. So I made a promise to myself to say each day how much she means to me, and avoid that circumstance where there's no second chance to tell her how I feel. 'Cause if tomorrow never comes, will she know how much I loved her? Did I try in every way to show her every day that she's my only one? And if my time on earth were through, she must face this world without me. Is the love I gave her in the past gonna be enough to last if tomorrow never comes? So tell that someone that you love just what you're thinking of if tomorrow never comes.
All righty. Everybody have a great rest of your evening. We will see everybody back here tomorrow night, 6 p.m. Central. Thanks, everybody.